WHO essential medicines and in vitro diagnostic list. So first time, in fact, that we discussed that in RDI, if I am correct, and it's on our action plan for the first time. So we'll give a first introduction, and then Johan Prévot will come to present their experience as a patient organization, both on medicines and on diagnostic. So what these lists are, there are three lists: the list of essential medicines, which is the best known, the list of essential medicines for children, and the list of in vitro diagnostic, which is more recent. It started in 1977, and more recently there were 460 products included on the list, including now some of advanced therapies, advanced drugs like in cancer. Around 150 countries are in fact using this list to define their national priorities in terms of coverage and provision of these medicines. So this is where the utility of this list is. So it needs to be clear for the one who would not be yet familiar with the concept of WHO priority list, is that it's not because a product is listed in this list that it is available at national level, not at all. It's simply that it is recognized as a medicine which is a priority, which should be provided in any national context. So that's something that then locally, the medical professional, the hospital directors, the patient groups, whoever can say, hey, it's in the WHO list, we want to have it in our country also. So why it is important is that it provides this kind of guidance I was just saying for the member states as a reference to make their own decisions of what they should prioritize in their limited budget. But it's also, from a patient advocacy perspective, a way to refer to that list to advocate locally in an hospital, in a city, in a region, or in a country to have access to it. Also, and that's not to be neglected, from the moment it is on the list of the WHO, it is then included into the work of different parts of the United Nations system, like the development programs, or in UNICEF, or in the High Committee for Refugees, etc. So that is also an important element. The overall, what's also evolving is that it reflects the change in the therapeutic options. So we're not anymore only with the antibiotics and other type of medicines of this sort. We are also now with therapies which are more advanced, and particularly in the field of rare disease. From the moment we have therapies which are potentially curative, there is a new interest of WHO for these treatments. The WHO assess the quality of the drug, review the different clinical trials that have been done. So there is an overall quality assessment, qualification by WHO. So there is different units of WHO intervening in that process. Sorry, I'm just checking if I'm trying to move fast. So just to refresh, in 2006, so it's not a century ago, right? It's 14 years ago. There was this kind of definition already that was saying that if the definition of an essential medicine is to be changed to include medicines needed for people with rare diseases, then the principle of distributive justice can be the moral basis for such a change, and cost effectiveness analysis can be the method used with these medicines. So that's 2006. 2006 was also when a report of WHO on essential medicines was in fact making a lot of confusion between neglected diseases, rare diseases, orphan products, etc. A confusion which has messed up the situation for years after that. But still, this period that was 2006 in this quote from Reidenberg you see now at the time of adoption of universal health coverage, the ambassador of Thailand, and you remember that Thailand was the leader at the General Assembly with Georgia. They were the two countries leading the process for adoption. This is what he said in a meeting. We must work together to ensure equitable and affordable access to quality health services and medicines for everyone. So, and particularly people with rare diseases. So we can obviously leverage all that. So concretely, the process of essential medicines, and that will be illustrated in a moment, is that there is a list, there is a group of experts which review the applications. There is process for application. So for instance, the next one, right, the next round is for the end of November 2020. And there is a WHO expert committee which will be meeting from the 22nd to the 26th of March 2021, to be confirmed, but roughly it's that. And these meetings, or part of it, are open to the public, so we can, or selected public, so we can participate to it. The most recent version of the list you can find on the WHO website, or maybe it's already provided to you through the documents of RDI. So now I move to the in vitro diagnostic. The list of in vitro diagnostic, it's a more recent concept. It's only in 2018 that it really started, the implementation. And it was to cover initially the high priority of infectious disease and HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, hepatitis, but they very much welcome rare diseases. And our initial conversation with them were from early 2019, and they really welcome us. So now there is over 60 types of in vitro diagnostic, which are being studied by them. The second edition was published in July 2019. At the moment, they are reviewing additional tests, so it has growing success. But we know also that at the moment they have revised the priority to focus on COVID. But the fourth cycle of submission is July, August 2020. So the revision will be then in March of the following year for 21 for the fourth edition. So that translates. Maybe I jumped directly to the way we're approaching it is that for this year, the way we're approaching it in our activities is that we consider that we're doing our homework for now, not more than that, but homework. So we want to do 2 webinars, one with the staff of WHO on essential medicines, and one from the staff of WHO on essential diagnostic. So 2 webinars, to our members and to the faculty experts, so that to present and also to engage them with us, to starting to recognize and engage publicly about rare diseases. Then we will do 2 webinars on case studies, like today with Johan. We will do other case studies based on what has succeeded or what has failed. In parallel, we are forming within the expert faculty of RDI a group of members of that faculty expert to become our champions on this topic, to bring their professional experience and knowledge, to help define where RDI can have a role, but also to help the members of RDI to develop their applications, and for us to liaise with you, obviously, always with you, because it has to be you to do it, with your clinicians, with the companies developing this product, or with the hospital. It can be either a patient group, an institution, or a company developing the application. But we want to gain experience, we want to gain knowledge of how the system works, we want to learn from the first experience already existing, and we want to build a body of experience from helping our members applying. And through these different expertise, we will become more experts progressively, collectively, to help more rare diseases to push their essential, what they think are their essential treatment medicines, but also diagnostic tools. So that's the approach. And maybe I've not insisted enough on the medicines, but what's changing that's recent. It's only 2020 that before for essential medicines, they were looking at the size of the population. Now it's not the size of the population only, it is any type, and maybe I can go back to that slide quickly, because maybe I should have insisted on that, is that before, yeah, you see it's the fourth indent, only going with the population size. But today, the objective is to have equally relevant high, middle, low-income countries access to new, highly effective, even if they are expensive medicines. But because WHO want also to use, after that, it's another step, but potentially joint procurement. So that's the kind of ground that we're laying with this work. And the purpose of it overall with this action plan is to help more of you to develop applications. Here you have 3 examples, and with that, I now leave the floor to Duran to introduce Johan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And that was a real tour de force to take us through what is hopefully going to be a very important initiative. So based on what Yann has said, you can imagine, the value of having a medicines for rare diseases, or as importantly, a diagnostics for rare diseases, as part and parcel of what the WHO is providing on their list, but also the opportunities for being able to use that to provide access. So we're really delighted to actually have Johan Prévot, who is with the International Primary Immunodeficiencies organization, IPOPI, who is going to share their experience with getting successfully a diagnostics on the WHO list. And I think it's both an inspiring presentation and also one that can give you some sense in terms of the amount of work and collaboration it takes. So thank you so much, Johan, for sharing this.
Thank you very much, Duran and Yann. So I've got 15 slides for 15 minutes and 50 years, 15 years of experience with the WHO list. So let me try to share my screen with you and we can get going.
But I hope that's just the beginning, Johan. Next time you will have 15 hours to go to.
Well, I think that'd be very boring. Okay, so well, thanks again for having me. I thought I would start with a very brief introduction on IPOPI, just in case some of you on the call don't know who we are. So we are the International Patient Organization for Primary Immunodeficiencies, and primary immunodeficiencies today represent 416 rare disorders, so quite a significant subgroup of rare diseases. And you can see that our mission is all about our dedication to improving awareness, access to early diagnosis and access to care. And of course, with these 2 last objectives, the work we have done with WHO is very important. And this is just another slide showing you the same objectives. Just to give you a little bit more detail of who we are today, we represent currently 68 countries. You can see the map of the world here. Every country painted in orange is a country where we have a national member organizations, and you can see that most recently we welcome Nicaragua, Tunisia, China, and Kenya. So very international scope, and so is the scope of our work. So if I now go over our collaboration with the WHO over the last few years, we've been particularly involved on 3 levels. Because of our patients are treated, a majority of our patients are treated with plasma-derived medicinal products, we have been very involved with the WHO on the activities around the topic of blood safety. We were a member organization of the WHO Global Collaboration for Blood Safety for a number of years. And we have also been very active on the model list of essential medicines, both for adult and pediatric patients, as well as more recently, the in vitro diagnostic essential list. And this is what I will focus my presentation on today. So I won't spend too much time because Yann very eloquently went through the top lines of what these lists are. Just perhaps to add, besides the fact that you have an essential medicines list for adult and one for children, you should probably know that each of these lists is actually split into two sections. You have a core list, which include the minimum medicine needs for a basic healthcare system. And then you have a complementary list for essential medicines for priority disease, for which specialized diagnostic medical care or specialized training are needed. Yann very rightfully mentioned that more expensive medicines have been increasingly considered by the WHO. This is certainly the case for us and immune globulins. So to tell you a little bit about our story with this list, the first list was published in 1977, as Yann said, and I think that pretty much from the early years, two plasma-derived medicinal products were included: coagulation factors for hemophilia and immunoglobulins for primary immunodeficiency and Kawasaki diseases. And in 2003, it sort of took everybody by surprise. What happened is that actually the WHO removed immunoglobulins from their list. I don't know whether it's related to some of the elements that you've described and all the discussions that were starting to take place around the mid-2000s, around rare diseases and so forth. But the reasons we were given at the time for withdrawal was that there were no WHO clinical guidelines recommending the use of immunoglobulins for primary immunodeficiency, and there was no need for them in view of availability of suitable vaccines, which obviously for anyone working in our sector is not really a valid argument at all. And so that means that this decision yielded a lot of stakeholder organizations, including IPOPI, to react immediately to the decision, try to appeal to the decision, and many letters were sent and arguments were developed, but to no avail. And the initial individual efforts to reinstate immunoglobulins in the list were unsuccessful. So we were not able at the time to get immunoglobulins back. And in 2005, the WHO provided us with the reason for rejecting the reinstatement. They were saying at the time that the prevalence of the target diseases is very rare, that there is insufficient evidence of its efficacy, and that there is insufficient evidence of its cost effectiveness. And so that led us to really ask ourselves, what did we do wrong? Because we thought we had the right arguments. And we started to ask ourselves, well, are medicines less essential if they are medicines to treat rare diseases? And if that's how the WHO views it, perhaps there's something we can do to make sure it's no longer the case. We also knew we had quite a number of good data on the efficacy of immunoglobulins. And we had good arguments and good patient surveys showing that treating the cause of the symptom rather than the symptoms alone is actually a cost-effective way to approach it. And so these reflections form the basis for a more, I would say, ambitious campaign. We realized that actually what was needed was a united voice rather than every stakeholder involved sending separate applications, approaching the WHO from different angles. What if we do this together? And so this is how we decided to do a joint application submitted by IPOPI and IUIS. So IUIS is the International Union of Immunological Societies. They basically represent the experts in the field, whilst including all of the others who had expressed concern. So all of the other organizations were included in this application, but they were included as supporting organizations. And I have to tell you, the application document in itself is already quite a detailed document. It includes a lot of information from proposed formulation, dosages that you should propose, to what regulatory processes are in place. Are there additional standards such as pharmacopoeia standards that are in existence and that you can demonstrate in your application. And in addition to all that, you have a number of annexes. Well, at least we had a number of annexes with detailed lists of scientific articles classified along the different categories and criteria requested by WHO. So it was, I have to say, a very long process to prepare. It really required, patient organizations and doctors working together, making sure we had the expert know-how as well to feed in all of the scientific information that we needed. And you can see on the slide that we had, others as well. We also had some industry associations that wrote support letters. These were included. We also had a call for action from the top international experts from many countries. And importantly, and it's not mentioned on the slide, we actually obtained an audience at the meeting of the expert committee in Geneva. And we went to that meeting with a representative from the doctors and a representative from the patient organizations. And actually, we had both the developing world countries and more developed economies also represented through our two representatives. And to this day, I think that having this dual approach is probably what was the last piece we needed to be successful. And so it was the case that in 2007, immunoglobulins were included back in the list. So when in 2018, we learned that the WHO was looking now at publishing a list of essential IVDs, diagnostic tests, we took the view immediately that that was an opportunity to actually bridge that gap between diagnosis and access to treatment. And our philosophy was, if the WHO makes recommendations on what should be the essential medicines that a country should have in place, including for some rare diseases, surely they should be open to including rare diseases in the scope of their diagnostic list, because the first step to care is a proper diagnosis. And it's certainly very true for primary immunodeficiencies. We know that the diagnosis delay, like many other rare diseases, can be quite significant. And so that required, again, quite an important internal effort. My colleague Leire, who is on the meeting today, has been absolutely a star coordinating our application. And she dedicated a lot of her time to coordinating the dossier, to liaising with the WHO EDL staff, whom I have to say were very receptive, were very helpful. We had some communications forth and back with the feedback of the reviewers. But of course, beyond involving IPOPI's time, we also had 3 volunteers, medical experts involved in the process. We had also laboratory staff members involved in the process, because there is such an amount of evidence that you have to provide. And I have to say that for in vitro diagnostics, sometimes it's not as obvious where you're going to find the evidence than perhaps with treatments. So it was a massive effort. Again, we took the same approach. It was an IUIS IPOPI joint campaign. We had several international scientific societies and researchers networks, as well as industry associations, again, supporting the application. And well, I'm pleased to say that we were successful. Again, I believe PIDs are the first rare diseases actually to be included in the EDL. This is also because initially I don't think WHO had planned completely for inclusion of rare disorders, but as Yann has stated already, I think this is changing, and certainly the fact that PIDs were now included is a good sign, I think, for the rest of the rare disease community that actually it can be done. Now, when we talk about essential in vitro diagnostics, of course, one thing you have to know is that when it comes to the diagnosis of primary immunodeficiency, you have several types of diagnostic tests that are involved. And we decided to actually go for the more baseline tests to start with. We thought it would increase our chances to get them in. It worked, and right now we are actually working on additional tests to be included for the upcoming list. We had been invited by the Secretariat of WHO to attend their meeting in Geneva again, which was due to take place actually, I think, in March of this year. And of course, it has been postponed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So why do they matter? And I'm getting near the end of the presentation. Well, as Yann says, you know, it's very important to realize that these lists can then become a platform or a document that you can use at the national level. A lot of countries will actually adapt the WHO list to their national setting. So what you will find is that you will have national list of essential medicines. They don't always match the WHO list. And so, you know, part of the game is to make sure that doctors, patients, and any other stakeholders that has an interest and may be able to help get together in the same way and advocate for access to diagnostic tests and treatments. So it's an excellent awareness raising tool as well, these lists, you know, both for the EML and the EDL. Certainly, in our view, the EDL has the potential of facilitating the diagnosis of PIDs, even by non-specialists, and so that could broaden the impact. And moving forward, we think that the link between both lists will be strengthened in future edition of the list by WHO and in country assessments as well. So this is my last slide. You know, lessons learned, I guess it's feasible, but be prepared to, you know, take some time and be really involved in this exercise, because it is a time-consuming exercise. You know, it will really require dedicated resources to be able to do it. The WHO guidelines and requirements need to be followed. That's my alarm telling me I should stop speaking. Okay, good. I will stop soon. So the WHO guidelines and requirements need to be followed really to the letter. That's another thing that's very important. Don't dismiss the details. Make sure you abide by what they ask. And of course, it's just the beginning of the advocacy, and the implementation at national level is really what will matter at the end. So that's it for me, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so very much, Johan. As I think we indicated before he spoke, be prepared for the fact that this is not a trivial exercise, but huge congratulations on both of those cases. I think are we having a poll first before we have questions for Johan and Yann?
No, there has been a change in plans. There's no poll, but we have more time to take questions.
We do have some questions. Okay.
We have time, 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay. So certainly we can have other people share any other experiences. Can I ask you, Johan, you know, given what you've said, you know, what happened? Well, number one, you know, when you brought back the IGs into the essential medicines list, was there any kind of response uptake in terms of different countries? Were you able to, or did any of your members actually able to use that to press forward in terms of access? And what about the in vitro diagnosis? Are there, you know, specific plans in terms of where this might be helpful, where they were not available before? I know it's a big global question, but I'm hoping that you can kind of even provide some examples if there are any.
So it's, you know, we're still working on the EML, and it's been 15 years. So again, you know, this is why my last slide said what it said, which is that it's then up to each country to start lobbying. It's not because your medicine is included in the list that automatically it's going to get reimbursed everywhere. You know, in our case, we know that an average primary immunodeficiency patient on immunoglobulins, it's probably 20 to 25,000 euros a year, which is not an insignificant number. And if you look at that in the setting of some of the developing world countries, obviously that's, you know, quite a commitment. Even, you know, in countries like Europe, we still see divergences, but it certainly has had a tremendous impact in some countries. I will always remember a mother from Bosnia coming to us a few years ago to one of our meetings, and subsequently she's actually become the first chair of the organization in the country. But she had actually obtained the reimbursement for immunoglobulin for her son based on what we had done, based on the inclusion of immunoglobulins. And that was just, one passionate patient advocating, using the tool. So we've had other countries, obviously, using the WHO list to try to get reimbursement and access to immunoglobulins. And increasingly, we're seeing these medicinal products being reimbursed. The reimbursement, again, will work at different levels depending on which country you go. A country like Vietnam will reimburse, for example, up to age 18, and will only have partial reimbursement for a number of these years. So, all of that's just the long battle of fighting for access and coverage. But our experience shows that the list is definitely an asset in these sort of advocacy efforts.
So thank you very much. I think Dennis was asking somewhat of the same questions, if there were specific examples. So appreciate very much your bringing up, especially with countries that, as you say, may be prompted to expand their access when it's on an essential medicines list. A question here from Rasha says, what's your advice for advocating access for new medicines for the neuromuscular diseases, MD, SMA, Duchenne, when there are huge price tags? So trying to get them onto the list. Is there a rationale for it? Is there a specific case that can be made?
Well, I think, again, I realize that, I said all treatments are expensive. There are treatments that are way more, expensive than that. Certainly part of how we played it at the time, and again, I think the times have changed. And I think what Yann says is quite important, that the WHO now has probably a different angle than they had when we were working on that. Certainly at the time, what helped us is the fact that PID was not just one disease, that it was already a group of disorders. And we could actually make a case that despite the fact that we represent rare immune disorders, if you take them as a whole, they represent a significant portion of people. And that did play in our favor, I think, at the time. But again, look at hemophilia. Hemophilia, more expensive treatments actually than PID. They're in the list. They probably wouldn't be able to use the same argument. So I think it can be done. I think it's just perseverance, making sure that all the data you have available, you show it, that you work with your doctors. I can't highlight enough how important that is. I truly believe that if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been successful. So you need to have that scientific and medical backup to your applications. And I'm not saying it's not going to be an uphill battle. Look at us. It took us 4 years to reinstate immunoglobulin. So it wasn't easy. I probably can say that when it comes to the IVD list, although again, it was a very time consuming, probably because we had some experience, running these sort of campaigns with the list of essential medicines. We were successful at the first attempt, and that's also perhaps an indication that the open-mindedness of WHO is there, to widen the scope of the list to rare diseases. So I think there is a momentum that can be used, but be prepared to fight for it and make sure you align with the right stakeholders.
Thank you very much. And hopefully, Johan, as we're moving forward, as Yann talked about, hoping to do some webinar in terms of making the process more accessible to people, that an expert like yourself obviously would be available to help provide that overall guidance, not committing you to do hand-holding on a group-by-group basis, though I can see a whole bunch of hands kind of coming up. I'm sure you've got your work cut out in terms of what you're doing, but I think it's an important lesson And certainly, I think as we're talking about, quote, expensive medicines or complex medicines, I mean, IG and the clotting factors are in some respects a fairly straightforward medication.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've seen, as you say, the WHO moving towards, and certainly in their last listing with the cancer medicines, more complex medicines. So being able to consider as essential, not just what is essential, as you said on one of your slides initially when IG fell off, that prevalence was the a defining factor. There seems to be that openness to saying we cannot just be limited by, you know, what are we talking about in terms of large populations. So I think the more we do it, the more that we will get that kind of acceptance. And I don't think any of us are suggesting that people just do it for the sake of doing it and to open it up. But I also know, as in many other cases, if nobody does it, if we're daunted by, you know, the work, even if we're not successful, that it will make a big difference. And certainly I think learning from each other in terms of how to do it, I think is a hugely important activity. We've got a couple minutes, and I'm just going to beg the indulgence to also a couple people mentioned and Yann mentioned at the end, you know, EURORDIS efforts on a working group for access to treatments for all. And we're seeing this as very much of a coordinated effort to try to maybe, you know, beyond just being on an essentials list, to also think about what are the barriers to access across different countries or different regions as well. So this effort is also just undertaking. We've got some of the patient organizations within RDI that are part of that initiative. So we're very excited about that, including other clinicians, scientists, etc. And certainly, you know, we are looking for some of the international rare disease organizations to join us, because you folks are the ones that have the experience of having, you know, to try to work with your, you know, member organizations in different countries to try to get that equity of access. And I think you've had some both successes and obviously some real challenges with regard to the different kinds of barriers. So I think this will be an important opportunity. We heard it yesterday as well, you know, the concerns around the fact that you may actually have even programs, and I think Dennis mentioned it yesterday, that are bringing these medicines into some of these countries where there may be political conflict, where there may be corruption, and then the medicines don't get to people. And we've got other cases where the medicines could be available and in fact could be donated, but the regulatory barriers in terms of getting them listed are such that we cannot get them there. So I think we do want to, you know, kind of make sure that we're having medicines that are going to be considered essential, you know, from a variety of sources, but also looking strongly in terms of what are the barriers, what are the facilitators in terms of access. Because I think, as you've said, and I think as Yann in his presentation there, getting them onto an essential list is oftentimes, you know, an important first step and an important leverage, but that certainly is no guarantee that they're going to make it to people. I think it's an interesting question, though, is, you know, what about, you know, an expensive medicine? Or are we suggesting that, you know, groups look at, you know, medicines that may already be, you know, there? They may be medicines that are already being used in other kind of areas, but they're not listed as essential for a particular rare disease. Is that a better pathway than to consider some of the more innovative medicines that obviously have a huge price tag?
Do you want me to comment on that?
Well, I wouldn't mind having you comment on it. You know,
I think it's certainly, you know, again, I think what we need to focus on is whether these expensive medicines fulfill an essential need. And I think, you know, that's your starting point. The cost effectiveness, it's a part of it. Perhaps I didn't mention the fact that when, you know, cost effectiveness was one of the criteria that we were judged on when we put down our application in 2006. And I can tell you honestly that, you know, we didn't have that much on cost effectiveness. We had, you know, one or two articles out there that, you know, made a point. We had good patient surveys. So we had good patient surveys that demonstrated the benefit of having patients on treatment versus treating these patients for their symptoms and really treating the cause. But that's not a proper pharmacoeconomic analysis. So we didn't have a proper pharmacoeconomic analysis, but we were able, through the patient experience, to have a convincing argument that it should be done, and it went through. I think a little bit of it is also the sort of political push that you can have. The fact that we got an audience, that we got the right people in the right room was very important. I think when it comes to RDI, you are very well placed now with everything that you've done on the UN, with the APEC. And by the way, the APEC, I mean, we are as involved. And for example, we contributed to the guideline on safe and efficacious coagulation factors and immunoglobulin from APEC. And we actually leaned on the WHO EML to do that as well. So I think, each piece is a part of the puzzle, and you certainly have placed RDI in a good position with regards to the WHO. So I do think there's a momentum. Now for individual, medicinal products, that will be up to RDI members. But I think with your experience, you can certainly guide them. You can certainly light the way for more rare diseases therapies to be included.
That's a really good, I think, statement there, because it also does help us, as we say, RDI collectively, to be able to support individuals. We do need to have the individual organizations or diseases that are making the application, but certainly we can also learn as RDI in terms of how to help it. A comment here from Godfrey from Thalassemia Foundation Ghana, and welcome Samuel to the panel. So lovely to see you. How great. We're delighted that you not only were made it here, but we've got your smiling face as part of the panel. So looking forward to you in the next session here. He says that thalassemia testing is very expensive in Ghana, and the management of sickle cell disease is really hard. Can the medicine cost be subsidized and HPLC device be supported? So this again goes back to, it's one thing to have, the treatments or even the devices as deemed essential. The challenge is, how do we get, the reimbursement? How do we get the support? And I think, obviously, I don't know if, there's obviously no easy answer to it, but I will say that we were very inspired in our panel recently, when Raquel Peck, who was the past executive director from the hepatitis, the Foundation or Society International Hepatitis, spoke about their experiences in terms of getting hepatitis treatment and hepatitis recognized by the WHO and becoming a significant force. And we know that when the hepatitis C therapies first came out, they were considered to be exorbitantly expensive, and they still are, and really challenges for even the well-developed countries and really well-funded health system to embrace. And yet, with the collaboration of the WHO and the designation of these hepatitis C life-saving curing therapies to be considered essential, huge pressure placed on the manufacturers to actually make them cost-effective and to make them accessible. So I think that's the other part of it. If they're deemed essential, what are the other kinds of mechanisms that can be brought into place to help offset the cost of some of these medicines in the low and middle income countries? And we certainly are a long ways from where something like a Gavi Alliance can help subsidize the cost of vaccines. But I think somewhere in that vision, right, is an important first step might be the fact that this is considered an essential medicine. Now, how do we lean on all stakeholders, including the manufacturers and the other foundations, to actually make them so that they are going to be more readily available in other countries, which is not a true answer there. So I think we're almost out of time. We've got a very good comment here from Trudy, who's a hemophilia patient organization in Zimbabwe. We continue to advocate for a time when